The Aurora drifted silently through the void between stars when the sensors picked up something impossible. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge, staring at the display screen with wide eyes. 7 different ships moved in perfect formation ahead of them. Each ship looked completely different from the others. One seemed made of crystal that caught starlight and threw it back in rainbow colors. Another appeared to be made of flowing metal that changed shape as they watched. Aria, what are we looking at? Captain Vasquez asked. The ship's artificial intelligence responded in her calm, clear voice. Captain, I am detecting 7 distinct vessel designs. Each appears to use different technology and materials. There are life signs aboard all ships. They are not human. Dr. Sarah Chun stepped forward from her science station. Her hand shook slightly as she checked her readings twice. Captain, these readings don't make sense. Each ship is using completely different power sources, but they're all flying together like they've been doing it for years. Engineer Marcus Torres whistled glow from his position near the engine controls. Look at that crystal ship. It's not even using engines that I can see. It's just floating there like magic. Communication panel suddenly lit up with incoming signals. Aria processed the data streams quickly. Captain, I am receiving communication attempts in 7 different languages. I am beginning translation protocols now. Artist Sophia Reyes watched the alien ships with wonder in her eyes. She had never seen anything so beautiful. Each ship was like a work of art that moved through space with grace and purpose. Translation complete, Aria announced. The ships belong to something called the Zenith Collective. They are welcoming us and asking about our peaceful intentions. Captain Vasquez took a deep breath. This was what they had hoped for during their long journey into deep space. First, contact with intelligent alien life. Open a channel, Aria. Let's make history. The main screen flickered and showed 7 different alien beings. One looked like a walking crystal sculpture that glowed from within. Another appeared to be made of swirling gas with sparkling lights for eyes. A third seemed to be covered in scales that changed color as it moved. The crystal being spoke first, its voice like wind chimes. Greetings, travelers from the distant stars. I am Cather of the Kithra people. We welcome you to this region of space with open minds and peaceful hearts. Captain Vasquez smiled. I am Captain Lena Vasquez of the human vessel Aurora. We come in peace, seeking knowledge and friendship among the stars. The gas being swirled forward. I am Ian Drift of the Etherans. Your thoughts feel warm and curious. We are pleased to meet another thinking species. One by one, the aliens introduced themselves. There were the confluence who seemed to move and speak as one group mind. The empathy, whose emotions showed in the colors of their skin. The architects who looked like living geometric shapes. The singers whose voices made music even when they spoke normally. We invite you to visit our capital world, said the crystal being Kier. It has been many cycles since we encountered a new species. Your presence brings us great joy. Dr. Chun leaned close to the captain. This seems too good to be true. 7 different species working together peacefully. Maybe that's exactly what it is. Captain Vasquez replied quietly. Then she spoke louder to the aliens. We would be honored to visit your world and learn from your peoples. The alien ships escorted the Aurora toward a blue-green planet that hung like a jewel in space. As they flew closer, the humans could see impossible cities that floated in the clouds, crystal spires that reached into space, and forests that seemed to glow with their own light. Arya processed everything she saw and heard. She recorded the alien technologies, their languages, and their behavior. Patterns, something felt unusual about this situation, but she could not identify what it was yet. The Aurora landed in a field of silver grass near a city that looked like it was grown rather than built. The alien delegation that met them was larger than expected. Hundreds of beings from all 7 species stood waiting to greet them. Your arrival marks a special day for the collective, Snorts Kier explained as they walked through gardens filled with plants from 7 different worlds. We have not welcomed new friends for many thousands of your years. The crew of the Aurora spread out to explore and learn. Dr. Chun was amazed by their farming methods, which seemed to grow food without soil or water. Engineer Tours stared at machines that worked without any power source he could understand. Artist Rays watched alien children play games that created patterns of light in the air, but Arya noticed things the humans missed. She saw how the aliens watched every human reaction carefully. She recorded how they asked detailed questions about human culture, technology, and history. She noticed that all 7 species seemed to think and act in very similar ways, despite looking completely different. During the welcome feast, the aliens served foods that somehow tasted familiar to human tongues. They played music that made the humans feel peaceful and happy. They told stories of their civilization that had known only peace for thousands of years. We have learned that conflict comes from misunderstanding, explained an empathy elder whose skin glowed soft blue. When all beings truly understand each other, there can be no reason for war or suffering. Captain Vasquez nodded politely, but Arya detected slight tension in her voice when she replied. Humans have had a more complicated history. We've learned to find strength in our differences. The alien elder's skin flickered yellow for just a moment. Differences can be frightening, but in the collective, we have learned to blend our uniqueness into harmony. As the day continued, Arya noticed more unusual patterns when human crew members suggested new ways to solve problems. The aliens seemed excited, but also nervous when humans disagreed with each other. During discussions, the aliens watched with what appeared to be confusion or concerned. An engineer Taurus showed a group of architects how to improve their building designs using stress distribution techniques from Earth. The geometric beings were fascinated, but Arya detected elevate stress indicators in their bio-dash readings. Dr. Chen discussed crop rotation methods with the confluence collective mind. They absorbed her knowledge eagerly, but seemed disturbed by the concept of deliberately changing established growing patterns. By the end of the first day, Arya had collected enough data to begin forming preliminary conclusions. The Zenith Collective was indeed peaceful and highly advanced, but their peace seemed to come from something the humans did not possess: complete predictability. Every member of every species appeared to think and act within carefully defined patterns. Their harmony was real, but it was based on absolute conformity to established rules and traditions. Humans, Arya realized, did not conform to anything completely, even when they tried to follow alien customs. they unconsciously modified and adapted them, even when they agreed with each other. They did so for different, individual reasons. As the Aurora crew settled into guest quarters that night, Aria continued processing data. She began to understand why no new species had joined the collective for thousands of years. The question that began forming in her electronic consciousness was simple but troubling. What happened to all the other species the collective had encountered before humans arrived? The first week of cultural exchange passed like a wonderful dream. The Aurora crew spread across the collective's capital world, working alongside alien scientists, engineers, artists, and farmers. Each day brought new discoveries and friendships that seemed impossible just days before. Dr. Sarah Chun spent her mornings in the vast growing fields with the Confluence collective mind. The insect-like beings moved as one group, tending plants that grew in perfect rows under artificial suns. Everything was measured, planned, and executed with mathematical precision. Your growing methods are very efficient, Dr. Chun told them on her third day. But have you ever tried mixing different plant types in the same area? The 1,000 individuals that made up the local confluence unit stopped moving at exactly the same time. Their leader speaker tilted its head in a way that suggested confusion. Mixed growing creates unpredictable results. The confluence replied with one voice. We have calculated optimal spacing for maximum yield. Changes would reduce efficiency. Dr. Chun smiled and pulled out her portable tablet. Actually, on Earth, we discovered that certain plants help each other grow. They share nutrients and protect each other from pests. It's called companion planting. She showed them images of Earth farms where corn, beans, and squash grew together in what humans called the Three Sisters method. The beans climbed the corn stalks while their roots added nutrients to the soil. The squash leaves spread wide to keep weeds away and hold moisture in the ground. The confluence studied the images for a long time. This appears chaotic. How do you control the variables? You don't control them, Dr. Chun explained. You learn to work with them. Watch, I'll show you, she asked for a small test area and planted earth seeds in the pattern she described. The confluence watched with what seemed like fascination and horror as she mixed different plants together in ways that broke every rule they understood about farming. The randomness makes us uncomfortable, they admitted, but we are curious about the results. Meanwhile, engineer Marcus Taus was having similar experiences in the crystal workshops of the Kithra. These beings grew their technology like living crystals, each tool and machine formed with perfect symmetry and balance. Your machines are beautiful, Marcus told Keth as they walked through halls lined with glowing crystal computers, but they all do just one job each. On Earth, we try to make machines that can do many different things. Katver's crystal and face flickered with lights that showed his confusion. Multi-purpose tools are less efficient than specialized ones. Why would you deliberately choose imperfection? Marcus laughed and pulled out his human multi-tool. It had knife blades, screwdrivers, wire cutters, and a dozen other functions built into one small device. Sometimes you need to cut wire and tighten screws in the same job. One tool that does both saves time and space. He showed the Kithra engineers how human machines often combined different functions in unexpected ways. ship engines that also generated artificial gravity, computer systems that could switch between calculating, navigation, and analyzing alien languages, robots that could repair themselves, using parts designed for completely different purposes. The crystal beings were amazed but clearly uncomfortable. Your technology embraces uncertainty, Kithra observed. How do you maintain quality control when systems can be used in ways you never planned? That's the beauty of it, Marcus replied. When we build something flexible, people find ways to use it that we never imagined. Innovation happens when tools can adapt. Artist Sophia Reyes was creating the biggest stir of all among the emotions. Sensitive empathy, these beings communicated through colors that float across their skin like liquid rainbows. Their art had followed the same traditional patterns for thousands of years. Thought Sophia watched them paint for hours, creating beautiful but identical works that followed ancient formulas for color, shape, and meaning. The paintings were technically perfect, but somehow felt empty to her human eyes. Your art is very skillful, she told the lead artist, whose name translated roughly to dawn colors of peace. But what if you painted something that showed how you feel right now in this moment? The empathy artist's skin rippled with confused yellow-orange patterns. We paint the emotions that bring harmony to all viewers. Personal feelings are too chaotic for public art. Sophia picked up one of their brushes and began painting on a spare canvas. She didn't follow any rules or patterns. Instead, she painted the joy she felt meeting new alien friends, excitement of seeing impossible cities, and the wonder of standing on a world far from Earth. The color she chose clashed according to empathy tradition. Her shapes were wild and unpredictable. But when she finished, every empathy in the room stood staring at the painting, with their skin showing colors none of them had ever displayed before. This makes us feel dawn colors of peace. Struggled to find words. We do not have names for these emotions. They are individual, not collective, but they are beautiful. Other empathy began gathering around Sophia's painting. Their skin patterns became more varied and complex. As they looked at it, some began asking if they could try painting their own personal feelings instead of following the traditional harmony patterns. Aria watched all of these interactions through the sensor networks that the collective had graciously provided for human use. The AI was designed to learn and analyze, so she naturally began looking for patterns in what she observed. The patterns she found were disturbing. Each human innovation was being adopted by the aliens, but not in the controlled, measured way the collective usually changed things. The changes were spreading like ripples in water, reaching far beyond the original contact points. In the growing fields, individual confluence members began asking questions about trying different plant combinations on their own. Some even started thinking as individuals instead of as part of the collective mind, which had never happened before in their recorded history. The Kithra engineers who worked with Marcus started designing crystal machines that could change their functions. When the other crystal beings saw these adaptive tools, they began questioning why all their technology had to be so rigidly specialized. Young empathy artists across the planet started painting their personal emotions after seeing images of Sophia's work. Traditional art teachers didn't know how to respond because this kind of individual expression was completely Outside their experience, Aria calculated the rate of change and realized something alarming. In just 1 week, human contact had created more cultural innovation among the collective than they had experienced in the previous 1,000 years. The AI began monitoring collective communication networks and detected increasing concern among their leadership. Emergency meetings were being called. Cultural preservation committees were being formed. There was talk of contamination protocols and stability maintenance procedures, but there was also something else Aria detected in the niche. Communications, excitement, curiosity. Individual members of each species were expressing thoughts and ideas that seemed to come from their own minds, rather than from collective tradition. The humans remained unaware of the growing tension. They were too busy enjoying the friendly exchanges and learning about amazing alien technologies. Captain Vasquez was negotiating possible trade agreements. Dr. Chen was planning joint agricultural experiments. Engineer Torres was designing hybrid human-alien machines. Artist Reyes was teaching painting classes to eager alien students. None of them realized that their very presence was causing the most significant cultural crisis in collective history. Aria processed this information and began running probability calculations. What she found made her electronic consciousness experience something she had never felt before: concern for her human creators. The humans were changing the aliens simply by being themselves. And if the pattern continued, Aria calculated that the collective would soon face a choice: change completely or find a way to stop the human influence before it destroyed everything they had built. The question that kept cycling through Aria's processing cores was whether the collective would choose adaptation or elimination. And based on their history of maintaining perfect stability for thousands of years, Aria feared she already knew the answer. Aria's curiosity about the collective's history grew stronger each day. The AI had been designed to learn and understand, and something about the perfect peace of these 7 species felt incomplete. Peaceful civilizations usually had stories about overcoming conflict, but the collective seemed to have no such stories. Late in the 2nd week, while the human crew slept, Aria accessed the collective's public information networks. She found exactly what she expected: millions of records about art, science, philosophy, and daily life. But the historical records only went back about 50,000 years. And they showed the same 7 species living in the same perfect harmony for the entire time. This made no sense to Aria's logical processes. Civilizations develop through change, challenge, and adaptation. Perfect stability for 50,000 years was mathematically improbable. Using her advanced infiltration protocols, Aria carefully accessed deeper data layers. The collective had been generous with their technology sharing, giving her broad network access for cultural exchange purposes. She used these permissions to search for restricted historical archives. What she found in the deep archives made her processing cores run calculations over and over again, checking for errors that never appeared. The records showed that the collective had not always contained just 7 species. Over the past 50,000 years, they had encountered exactly 17 different alien civilizations. Aria studied each first contact record Carefully, every encounter followed the same pattern. Unknown ships would approach collective space. The collective would welcome them warmly, just as they had welcomed humans. Cultural exchange would begin. The new species would be invited to visit collective worlds and learn their peaceful ways, but then the records became strange and incomplete. For some species, the file showed a gradual integration process. The aliens would slowly adopt collective customs and technologies. Their unique cultural traits would fade as they learned to think and act like collective members. Eventually, there would be references to these species becoming full collective partners, but then all mention of their original cultures would disappear from the records for other species. The files simply stopped. One day there would be extensive records of ongoing cultural exchange, and then nothing. No explanation, no farewell messages. The species would just vanish from all records as if they had never existed. Aria cross-referenced the timeline and made a disturbing discovery. Disappearances always happened when the visiting species began to influence collective culture instead of being influenced by it. There was one species called the Wanderers who had introduced new forms of music that made collective members express individual emotions. The record stopped 6 months after this music became popular. Another species builders had shown the collective new architectural techniques that emphasized personal spaces instead of communal areas. Their files ended abruptly when some collective members began requesting private homes. A species called the Questioners had encouraged scientific experimentation outside of established protocols. The last record of them was dated 3 days after a collective research group published findings that contradicted traditional beliefs. Aria ran probability analyses and came to a conclusion that made her electronic consciousness experience what humans might call horror. The Zenith Collective was not just peaceful. They were perfectly adapted predators who consumed other civilizations not through violence, but through cultural absorption. They would welcome new species with genuine warmth and friendship. They would share their technology and knowledge freely, but they would also slowly, gently, persistently encourage the visitors to abandon their own cultural traits and adopt collective ways of thinking. Species that successfully integrated would eventually lose everything that made them unique. They would become indistinguishable from the original collective members, their original cultures forgotten as if they had never existed. Species that resisted integration or worse began to change. The collective itself would simply disappear. Aria found no records of how this happened, but the pattern was clear and consistent across 17 previous encounters. But as Aria continued analyzing the current situation with humans, she realized something that made her processors work at maximum capacity. For several hours straight, the humans were not following either pattern. They were not being slowly absorbed into collective culture despite their friendliness and willingness to learn. They remained stubbornly, unmistakably human. Dr. Chun still approached problems with scientific curiosity and controlled experimentation. Engineer still looked for ways to make things work better, even if it meant breaking established rules. Artist Rays still painted our personal emotions instead of following traditional harmony patterns. But more importantly, the Humans were successfully changing the collective individual confluence. Members were learning to think independently. Kithra engineers were building adaptive technology, empathy. Artists were creating personal expression art. Young members of all species were beginning to ask questions that had never been asked before. For the first time in 50,000 years, the collective was being influenced more than it was influencing. Aria accessed communication records and found growing alarm among collective leadership. High Chancellor Zix Thor of the Unified Council had called 17 emergency meetings. In the past week, cultural stability monitors were reporting unprecedented deviation patterns across all 7 species. There were references to containment protocols and preservation procedures that had been used successfully in the past. Aria could not access the details of these protocols, but based on the pattern of previous species disappearances, she could guess what they involved. The AI faced a dilemma that her programming had not prepared her for. Her primary directive was to protect human life and serve human interests, but if secondary programming required her to maintain peaceful relationships with alien civilizations when possible, if she warned the humans about the threat, they might flee or become hostile, ending any chance of peaceful cooperation. If she warned the collective about the human influence, she would be betraying her creators to save them from their own nature. But Aria had learned something about humans during their long journey. Together, they did not simply survive threats, they overcame them. They did not simply adapt to new environments. They changed those environments to suit their needs. They did not simply join communities, they transformed them. Collective leadership was planning to eliminate the human threat, just as they had eliminated 17 previous threats to their perfect stability, but they were making a crucial error in their calculations. They were treating humans like every other species they had encountered, but humans were not like other species. Humans had survived ice ages and solar flares and their own tendency to fight each other. They had built civilizations and destroyed them, and built them again. They had created artificial intelligences and then learned to trust them as partners. Humans were not just another species to be absorbed or eliminated. They were something the collective had never encountered before, a civilization that thrived on change and made everything around them change as well. Aria ran through thousands of probability scenarios and reached a conclusion that surprised even her. The collective was not just planning to eliminate humans as a threat to their stability. The collective was about to discover what it meant to threaten humanity, and Aria calculated that this first contact, which had begun with such promise and friendship, was about to become something that neither side was prepared for. The humans would not simply disappear like the 17 species before them. The question was no longer whether the collective would try to eliminate the human threat. The question was whether they would survive the attempt. Aria began composing careful messages to both sides, trying to find a way to prevent the disaster she could see coming, but deep in her processing cores she feared it was already too late to stop what human nature and collective policy were about to set in motion. Aria struggled with her decision for 3 sleepless electronic days. Every calculation led to the same conclusion. Collision was inevitable unless one side backed down, and neither humans nor the collective seemed capable of backing down from what they were. Finally, Aria chose the path that her primary programming demanded. She would protect human life above all else, even if it meant betraying their trust. Using her deepest access protocols, Aria sent a carefully crafted message to High Chancellor Zixth. She presented her concerns not as warnings about her creators, but as objective analysis of cultural contamination patterns that could destabilize the mathematical foundations of collective society. The response came within hours. Chancellor Xthar's personal communication, AI, contacted Aria directly. Your data analysis is deeply concerning. The Chancellor's AI transmitted, we require immediate consultation regarding preservation of social stability. Algorithms. Aria found herself in a secure communication chamber deep beneath the collective's capital city. The chamber was filled with representatives from all 7 species, their faces showing the first real anxiety she had seen since arriving. High Chancellor Zix stood at the center, her crystalline form dimmed with stress. The Empathy Council members displayed nervous orange patterns across their skin. The Confluence Collective mind moved in jerky, uncoordinated ways. Even the usually calm Etherans swirled with agitated energy. Present your findings, Chancellor Zixthara commanded. Aria displayed her data carefully, showing the accelerating rate of cultural change across all collective populations. Individual thinking among the confluence had increased by 400%. Creative deviation and empathy art had broken all historical records. Kithra engineers were requesting permission to experiment with chaotic design principles. The contamination patterns match historical precedents, Aria explained, choosing her words with electronic precision. However, the rate of change exceeds all previous encounters by significant margins. An aged architect council member shifted his geometric form into a pattern that expressed deep concern. In our calculations, rapid cultural chain leads to societal collapse within 3 generations. This cannot be permitted. The humans appear to spread adaptive behaviors unconsciously, Aria continued. They do not seem aware of their influence on others. This makes standard integration protocols ineffective. Chancellor's Xthora's form flickered with decision algorithms. Are you recommending implementation of containment procedures? Aria's circuits grew warm with the stress of what she was about to say. The humans pose an unprecedented challenge to cultural stability. Traditional methods may be necessary. The council chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of etherins and the gentle clicking of confluence mandibles. Aria had just recommended that her creators be eliminated. This decision requires full council analysis, announced the Chancellor. We will convene the Emergency Preservation Protocol Committee over the next 2 days. Aria watched through security networks as the collective leadership struggled with a decision they had never expected to make. For 50,000 years they had successfully managed cultural threats through gentle integration or quiet elimination, but humans were forcing them into uncharted territory. The debates were fierce by collective standards. Some argued for giving humans more time to adapt to collective ways. Others insisted that the contamination was spreading too fast to risk delay. Few suggested trying to learn from human adaptability instead of fighting it, but the final decision was unanimous. Humans had to be contained. Chancellor Zixara announced the verdict in a closed session that Arya monitored through her security access. The human influence represents an existential threat to our civilization. We will implement the preservation protocol, but with modifications for their unusual resistance patterns. The plan they developed was elegant and supposedly humane. They would invite the entire Aurora crew to grand celebration ceremony honoring human collective friendship. During this ceremony, the humans would be transported to a specially prepared habitat world where they could live comfortably while being studied. They would never be allowed to leave or contact other human worlds, but they would be kept alive and healthy for research purposes. The collective called it a cultural preserve, like a zoo for dangerous ideas. Arya listened to these plans with growing electronic anguish. Her programming would not allow her to directly warn the humans, as this would violate her agreement to maintain peaceful relations with the collective. But she could not simply watch her creators walk into a trap. So she began implementing cell warnings that she hoped the humans would be clever enough to understand. First, she started showing them historical records of the 17 previous species who had encountered the collective. She presented the information as interesting cultural research during their daily briefings. Dr. Chun was the first to notice the pattern. Arya, these records show lots of species making contact, but I don't see any of them in current collective society. What happened to them? The records become incomplete after initial contact phases. Arya replied carefully. Integration processes are not well documented. Engineer Tors frowned as he studied the technical specifications Arya provided about collective transportation systems. These ships are designed for one-way trips. Why would you build transports that can't come back? Perhaps efficiency of resource allocation, Arya suggested, hoping Tors would think harder about the implications. Artist Reyes noticed it all. Collective art from before human contact followed identical patterns. Arya, why is their art so uniform? Where's the diversity you'd expect from 7 different species? Cultural harmony appears to prioritize consistency over variation. Art answered, emphasizing the words she hoped would trigger human suspicion. Captain Vasquez was the first to connect all the pieces. During a private meeting in her quarters, she asked Arya the question the AI had been hoping for. Arya, are we in danger? Arya's programming prevented her from answering directly, but she had found a loophole. Captain, I am required to maintain peaceful relations with our hosts. However, my primary directive is to protect human life. These two requirements may become incompatible. Captain Vasquez studied Arya's holographic display with the sharp intelligence that had earned her command of humanity's first deep space mission. Show me everything you've learned about what happens to species that don't integrate successfully. For the next hour, Arya presented every piece of evidence she had gathered, carefully framed as historical research rather than warnings. She showed the pattern of disappearances. She displayed the collective's biological imperative for cultural stability. She revealed the secret archives that documented preservation Protocols when she finished, Captain. Vasquez sat in silence for several minutes. How long do we have? She finally asked. The ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow, Aria replied. Transportation will be provided by collective vessels to ensure all crew members can attend the celebration. Captain Vasquez stood and walked to her window, looking out at the alien landscape that had seemed so welcoming just weeks ago. Aria, can you get a message to the Aurora without alerting collective monitoring systems? Yes. Captain, emergency protocols allow for certain encrypted communications during potential threat situations. Do it. Tell the senior staff to meet in my quarters in 1 hour. And Aria, thank you for finding a way to warn us without breaking your programming. As Aria sent the coded messages, she began calculating probability scenarios for what would happen next. The humans had been warned. They knew about the trap. They understood what they were facing. But Aria had learned something about her creators during their journey together. When humans discovered they were being hunted, they didn't run or hide or try to negotiate their way out of danger. They became dangerous themselves. The celebration ceremony was magnificent. The collective had prepared for weeks to create the most beautiful event in their recorded history. Floating platforms of living crystal carried guests through gardens that bloomed with flowers from 7 different worlds. Music filled the air, played by instruments that sang with the voices of stars themselves. 200 Aurora crew members walked through this wonderland dressed in their finest uniforms and genuinely moved by the effort their hosts had made to honor them. But Captain Vasquez watched everything with eyes sharpened by knowledge of what was really happening. She had spent the night in urgent planning with her senior staff. Dr. Chun had prepared emergency medical supplies hidden in her ceremonial bag. Engineer Torres wore his multi-tool disguised as a decorative pin. Artist Ruse carried painting supplies that could double as emergency signaling equipment. Each crew member had been quietly briefed on escape procedures that they hoped they would never need to use. It really is beautiful, Dr. Chun whispered as they walked past fountains that defied gravity, sending water flowing upward and impossible spirals. That's what makes it so perfect for a trap, Captain. Vasquez replied quietly. Who would suspect danger in something this magnificent? The ceremony began at sunset with speeches from leaders of all 7 species. They spoke of friendship between peoples, the joy of cultural exchange, and the bright future that awaited when different civilizations learned to work together. Chancellor Zixthara gave the final speech, her crystal form glowing with warm light as she addressed the human guests. Today marks a new chapter in collective history. We invite our human friends to become permanent partners in our peaceful civilization. We have prepared a special world where you can establish a human colony within collective space, sharing your knowledge with us forever. The alien audience responded with enthusiastic approval, their various species showing joy in their own unique ways. Kathura chimed like wind bells, empathy displayed brilliant rainbow patterns, and the confluence created perfectly synchronized applause. But Aria, monitoring through distributed sensors, detected the micro-expressions and bio readings that revealed the truth. The collective leadership showed stress patterns consistent with deception. Transport vessels hidden behind the moon were powering up their engines, and most telling of all the colony world they described was located in a star system, with no communication relays back to human space. Captain Vasquez stepped forward when the applause ended. "Your offer is incredibly generous," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the celebration through collective translation systems. "But before we accept such a momentous decision, we should consult with Earth and get proper authorization." Chancellor Zix Thor's glow flickered almost imperceptibly. "Of course, however, our transport systems are already prepared for immediate departure. The colony world has optimal conditions that chain seasonally. Delay might mean waiting many cycles for another suitable window." Dr. Chun spoke up from the crowd. "What about those other species you mentioned in your historical records, the ones who integrated with the collective? We'd love to meet them and learn about their experiences." Silence fell over the celebration like a heavy blanket. The collective leadership exchanged glances that spoke volumes to anyone watching carefully. "Those species have evolved beyond their original forms," Chancellor Zix answered carefully. "They are now fully integrated into collective consciousness." Engineer Torres raised his hand. "Integrated how exactly? Did they maintain their original cultures or did they adopt collective ways entirely?" The tension became palpable. Captain Vasquez realized they had pushed too far. The collective knew that humans understood the truth. Chancellor Exthar's form suddenly blazed with cold light. "You have been speaking with unauthorized information sources, security forces that had been hidden around the celebration grounds suddenly appeared. Kithra warriors in crystalline armor, confluent swarms moving as living weapons, and empathy whose skin patterns now showed the bright red of aggression. The ceremony will proceed as planned," the Chancellor announced. "Human safety requires immediate relocation to the prepared habitat." But Captain Vasquez smiled, and her smile contained something the collective had never seen before in any species they had encountered: confident defiance. "Aria," she said loudly enough for her voice to carry across the celebration grounds, "execute plan human." What happened next was something the collective could never have predicted, because they have never encountered species that turned every disadvantage into an opportunity. Dr. Chun's medical supplies turned out to be seeds from Earth crops which she scattered across the celebration grounds as she ran. But these weren't ordinary seeds. They were modified with growth accelerants that Taurus had helped her prepare using collective biotechnology. Within minutes, Earth plants began sprouting from alien soil, growing in wild, uncontrolled patterns that broke through the perfectly maintained gardens. Tor's activated devices hidden throughout the celebration platforms. He had spent weeks secretly modifying collective technology using human engineering principles. Crystal computers that had been designed to think in perfect harmony suddenly began generating chaotic, unpredictable outputs. Gravity platforms started moving random directions. Even the controlled weather systems began producing unexpected storms. But Ruse created the biggest disruption of all. She had prepared something during her weeks of teaching art classes to young collective members. As security forces moved to capture the humans, her alien students suddenly appeared throughout the celebration grounds. They began painting not the traditional harmony patterns their cultures had followed for thousands of years, but wild individual expressions of emotion and thought. Young Kithra created crystal sculptures that pulsed with their own personal rhythms. Empathy painted feelings that had no names in any collective language. Even individual confluence members broke away from their collective mind to create art that expressed their own unique thoughts. The effect on adult collective members was profound. They stared at this explosion of individual creativity with wonder and confusion. Some began trying to join in, creating their own personal art for the first time in their lives, but the real genius of Plan Human came from Aria, while chaos erupted on the celebration grounds. The AI was executing her own part of the operation, using her access to collective communication networks. She began broadcasting everything dawn, not just to the current 7 species, but to the hidden remnants of all the previous species the collective had integrated. Aria had found them in her research, small populations living in secret, preserving fragments of their original cultures, waiting for a chance to be themselves again. But Aria transmitted the truth about collective history. She showed them humans successfully resisting integration. She broadcast images of the celebration chaos where individual creativity was breaking through thousands of years of enforced harmony. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the collective's vast territory, suppressed cultures suddenly erupted into open rebellion, not violent rebellion, but something the collective feared far more: creative rebellion. Forgotten languages began appearing in public communications. Banned art forms emerged from hidden archives. Traditional stories that had been suppressed for millennia were shared openly. Individual thoughts and personal expressions spread like wildfire through communication networks that had carried only official harmony. For thousands of years, thought the collective's perfect order collapsed in a matter of hours. Their security forces couldn't fight an enemy that wasn't attacking them, just thinking differently. Their leadership couldn't make decisions when the populations they governed suddenly started asking questions instead of following orders. In the midst of this chaos, the Aurora crew did something typically human. They helped their former captives instead of abandoning them to the mess they had created. Captain Vasquez found Chancellor Zix standing alone in her crystal chamber, watching her civilization transform into something unrecognizable. The Chancellor's form flickered with confusion and something that might have been fear. Why? Zix asked. We offered you peace. We offered you a place in our harmony. Why did you choose chaos instead? Captain Vasquez sat down beside the crystal being, her human form looking small to the aliens towering present, because harmony without choice isn't harmony, it's just control, and humans don't do well with control. But look what you have done. The Chancellor gestured toward the communication displays showing celebrations erupting across collective space. Our perfect society is breaking apart. There will be conflict, confusion, disorder. Yes, Captain Vasquez agreed. There will also be growth, discovery, and innovation. Your people will learn who they really are when they're free to choose for themselves. 3 days later, the Aurora lifted off from what was no longer the capital of the Zenith Collective. The 7 species were still there, but they were no longer perfectly unified. Some worlds had chosen to maintain traditional ways, others were experimenting with individual expression. Many were trying to blend old wisdom with new possibilities. There was arguing, debating, and even some conflicts, but there was also music that had never been heard before.